Today we are concluding our exploration of the transformational concepts that we have been looking at in this book, The Anatomy of Peace, right? But of course, our study continues because we're lifelong learners, right? Or maybe it's a lifelong effort to remember what we have learned and to practice it. We began our study by asking this question: how can I experience more peace in my heart and create more peace in the world? Us being Unity Center of Peace is kind of high up on our list of values. And, for those of us on a spiritual path, though, we're pretty familiar with connecting with inner peace, through meditation, through spiritual practices. We connect in our center, right? With that inner peace, we open to it, we affirm it, we sing about peace. For us, peace is an internalized experience. And, sometimes maybe we might even feel that we embody peace. I'm embodying peace in this moment. And then someone comes along and says something or does something that triggers us. And suddenly, where'd that peace go, right? We react, and not always lovingly, not always peacefully. As I said a few weeks ago, we would be the most peaceful, loving individuals if it just weren't for other people. It's relationships that challenge our peace, right? Relationships challenge our peace. Also, we live in a world that appears to be in conflict and has from the beginning of time. It's a constant. But even though there is conflict all around us, what is also true is that we have the power to open to the peace that is within us and create it in our relationships and in our lives. We just need to know how. We need to know the strategies, right? And that's this book is, showing us the strategies for creating that. So these strategies and these truths are kind of woven into this narrative, this fictional story of two men, one an Israeli, his name is Avi, and the other's a Palestinian, his name is Yusuf. Both have lost their fathers at the hands of the other side. And both have spent an enormous time in their lives, in turmoil about that and fighting against life with a heart at war. And then eventually both, through the help of their mentors, learn these strategies. They learn new ways of being. They learn new ways of being that allow them to open to the peace that is within them, to create peace in their world, to live more productive and successful lives. In fact, so effective, these techniques are so effective that they've come together to co-lead this program. It's a kind of an outward bound program for troubled teens and that kind of thing. And so while the teens are away doing their program in the wilderness, Avi and Yusuf work with the parents, who we find out are the ones that really are the biggest source of the conflict. And they teach them these mindset, it's really mindset shifts that help them to resolve the conflict in their lives and in their families. So through the story, we learn that, we can all unconsciously get kind of caught in these mindsets that invite conflict, that actually invite conflict unconsciously. And then we learn the strategies for creating cooperative, loving relationships that proactively resist conflict. And as we learn, some of the sources, some of that conflict comes from trying to get other people to change. Remember, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago and what that was like. It's like, oh, if that person would just change, if they would just think like me, if they would just do what I want them to do, let me try to get them to change. Can you relate? And how effective is that, right? So Yusuf explains that rather than trying to get people to change, that we become an agent of change. That we become an agent of change. And he says in the book, I become an agent of change to the degree that I begin to live to help things go right, rather than simply to correct things that are going wrong. So his point is that many of us spend a lot of time, trying to deal with things that are going wrong or fixing things that have gone wrong, and too little time helping things to go right. So this last month, we have talked about all the different ways that we can help things go right. And one of those is to become more conscious of our way of being, to become more conscious of our way of being. And we talked about Martin Buber, the philosopher that was kind of coming up around the beginning of the 20th century, and the ideas that were emerging at that time, that we're not separate selves, that we are inherently intertwined, that we grow and develop with others, we have being with others. And so Buber took this a step further, and he proposed this idea that there are two ways of being, really two ways of relating. One is to see the other as a person with hopes and dreams and fears and needs just like us, and to really see that person on a level playing field, as, in occupying the same equal space. And we might say, in unity, which we have opened to the Eastern philosophy idea of namaste, right? The divine in me sees and honors the divine in you. That's the meaning of namaste. So Martin Buber calls this the I-thou position, the I-thou position. And that creates a heart at peace. The other way of relating, the other way of being, is where we see the other as an object. We objectify them. We don't think about their hopes and dreams and needs and fears at the moment, right? Or we put them in a category of people that we paint with a large brushstroke, right? That's the I-it position. And that creates a heart at war. And so when our hearts are at war, that just leads to more unhappiness. It perpetuates conflict. And the thing is, we don't always know. We're unconscious for a lot of it. It could be just like a default, we don't know we're there. And then suddenly we're really defending and knowing that we are right. And that other person, they are wrong. We dig in our heels, and the book tells us that when our hearts are at war, we tend to exaggerate others' faults. We exaggerate others' faults. They call this horribilizing, which is kind of a fun word, but very descriptive, horribilizing. We also have a tendency to exaggerate the importance of whatever justifies our position. So a few weeks ago, I shared the story about Yusuf and Mordecai. And if you missed that, by the way, just want to let you know that all of these talks in this series have been recorded, and they're all on YouTube. And if you haven't found our YouTube page yet, go to YouTube, Unity Center of Peace, all the talks and many of the meditations and affirmations are there, but the whole series. So if you missed anything, you can go back and take a look at it. But today I want to talk about Avi, who is the other side of this story. He is the Israeli, right? And he shares this story of when he was young, growing up in Jerusalem. And he had a best friend. His best friend's name was Hamish, and he was Palestinian. Well, you know, when you're little, you don't always see the differences, right? He didn't see any differences. He was just a good friend. They had a lot in common. They went and they played and they had fun. It was his best friend. And then one day on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Hebrew calendar, the Egyptians and Syrians they launched a surprise attack on Israel. And Avi's father was killed as a result of that. Well, the person that came to the door to tell them this and to grieve with them, he wanted to grieve with his friend, was his best friend, Hamish. So Avi is in shock, right? He's in shock and he sends his friend away and he screams obscenities at him and he's angry and he sees Hamish as the face of all the tragedy of everything that's gone wrong in his life. And he horribilizes him, right? He dehumanizes him and he starts to hate all Palestinians. And then that further leads to hating all Jews who don't hate Arabs as much as he does. See, he is dehumanizing. And he says later, after he's sort of recovered from all of this, he says, whenever I dehumanize another, I necessarily dehumanize all that is human, including myself. And so what happens with all that hate, it begins to turn inward, and it turns into self-loathing. He feels broken. He develops a stutter. He has trouble in school. He feels ostracized. He feels that others have an advantage that he doesn't have. He's fighting against a world that he feels is against him. And that leads to depression. And that depression actually manifests, and he tries to take his life twice, unsuccessfully, fortunately. But on that second attempt, his mother, the family has moved to America now, and his mother has heard about this program in Arizona where, teens learn different ways of being. And she says to Avi, you either enroll in that program or I will disown you. And so he doesn't want to lose the one person, that he loves. And so reluctantly, right, he joins, he goes and he enrolls in this program that it's called Mount Moriah. But he resists everything. He's hating everything. Not unlike the girl that last week, Chris told us a story about the girl, the teen who bolted out of the car and ran without her shoes on through the streets of Phoenix, for hours. She was hating and resisting everything. Well, the same is true for Avi. And then one evening he walks up a hill, he sits on a hill and he looks out at the stars. And Yusuf, who is running the program at this time, so Yusuf has kind of learned through a mentor all of these strategies and gotten it down so well that he has opened this Mount Moriah program. So he goes up to the hill and he sits with Avi. And he looks out at the stars and he says, the night sky is the same as we see in Jerusalem. And something about that commonality just allows all of the resistance to melt, all of the anger. It just starts to melt. And Yusuf asks him to talk about his father. Tell me about your father. And as he talks about his father, the floodgates burst open and he just releases all this grief that has been building inside of him for years. So you see what Yusuf is doing here is that he's not trying to get him to change, right? He doesn't go up there with the intention to get him to change. He goes up to be with on an equal footing, an equal, experiencing the commonality that they have, a heart at peace, just wanting to be with him. And that's the thing, right? That's the thing that allows Avi to allow that resistance to release. So that's the difference. He was an agent of change, right? Rather than trying to change the other, he was an agent of change. So from that moment on, everything changes. He sees Yusuf as kind of a substitute father, a father figure. And he learns these strategies so well that he's invited to co-lead this program. And that's, where we begin the story, where they're co-leading this program. So we don't have to have as traumatic a childhood as these two men did to develop a heart at war. I mean, just living in the world, it's easy to have a heart at war, to feel like we're fighting against others, we're fighting against the world, right? That the book tells us that these are patterns that we can get stuck in, and they describe them as boxes. And I kind of see it more as a loop that keeps us stuck in a cycle that is self-perpetuating, but it's kind of the same thing, right? Well, a loop, a box, whatever, we're really talking about the same thing. So let's take a look at some of these boxes. We've written some out and I have them on some slides here. Chris, if you would bring up that first slide. We're just going to kind of go through this rather quickly. But you could take a picture of this, and then have it, or the other thing is that we could put it on the website and you could download this. And then, of course, I have taken it out of the book. That comes directly from the book. So this is the better than box. This is where Lou was. Lou is one of the major characters in the book who comes in with his company is, imploding, and his family is too. He comes from the orientation of a better than. Let's look at the next slide, which is the I deserve box. That's kind of where Yusuf started. The I deserve. And the way you want to read this is it goes clockwise from the view of myself. It's a view of myself, view of others, view of the world, and then that leads to the feelings. Now let's look at the next box. That's the less than box. That's the one that that Avi gets trapped in, broken, not good enough. I see others as advantaged, as blessed in ways that I am not. Therefore, I see the world as a gift, as difficult, as against me. And that leads to feelings of helplessness, being a victim, depressed, jealous. And then the last box that we have here is need to be seen as. Let's look at this because we haven't really talked about this all month. This idea of needing to be seen well. So a lot of people kind of get in this. Particularly women have a tough time with this, I think. So that's the view. You need to be well thought of. You need to be thought as, capable and strong, and you could do it all, right? And then sometimes you think you're fake because you can't do that, deep down, like they're going to find out. And then we have a view of others then as being judgmental. We see them as your audience, maybe even threatening. And then that leads to a view of the world as they're judging me, they're watching me. It's a dangerous place, which then leads to feelings of anxiety, fear, neediness, being overwhelmed. So you see how these boxes, these things that we can get trapped in, kind of, perpetuate this and they just create more conflict. They perpetuate that. Sometimes we can find ourselves in one box with one person. We're in one of these boxes, and then we switch with how we're relating to another person. We're in a different box. I know myself. I can kind of jump from box to box if I'm not conscious. So we want to look at, where we might be in this. And the good news here is that we can escape at any time from any of these boxes and free ourselves to experience more freedom, more joy, more abundance, more peace in our lives. We can do that at any time. And here is, if you bring up the slide that shows the steps that they talk about in the book. These are the specific steps that we can use to escape, jettison out of these boxes, all right? So the first is look for signs for being in the box. Pay attention to your feelings. I always talk about, we don't want to, the old idea in metaphysics is that you don't want to feel those feelings. You want to push them away. You want to affirm them away. That's really not helpful, because feelings can point in the direction of where our thinking might be off, what old beliefs we have, and can point the way to these boxes that we can get trapped in. So see, am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling helpless? Am I feeling jealous? Am I feeling entitled, resentful, impatient? And then see if you're feeling any of those, see if it might be related to one of those boxes. Then 2, find an out of the box place. That's sort of going to a place where we're vibrationally in a different place than that box. And that's what Chris was doing last week with guiding the meditation and reading the poetry. So identify those things that can really help, like poetry, like music is a really good one, like dancing, like singing, gratitude. Abraham Hicks talks about a rampage of gratitude. That's a sort of rapid fire, one gratitude, you paying attention. I'm grateful for this and this and this. And after that, after a while of that, you're just sort of flying at a high vibrational level. If you have an idea about something that you can do that gets you to a completely different vibrational place, go ahead and share that with us. This might be something that's not written down here, something that you do that can help you get into a completely different place. Go ahead and share that in the comment section. And then the third thing is, from this place, right? From this place, you want to look back on the situation or the person and ponder it anew, from a different place. And there's all these questions that I have down here. Again, you can take a picture of the screen or we'll put it up on our website. These questions can be helpful in reevaluating the situation, seeing the person from a different perspective. And then the fourth thing is to stay out of the box. In order to stay out of the box, we want to take action, take action. So in the book, Avi talks about, he wrote a letter to Hamish after, he learned these new ways of being. He writes a letter to him, apologizing profusely, and sends it to him. So whatever it is that you're guided to do, your instinct tells you to do, go ahead and do that. So these are all very helpful ways that we can really shift our mindset and shift our way of being that can completely transform our relationships, starting with us. And to take it deeper, in New Thought, we might even want to go deeper with this and to see a new perspective of ourselves. If we view ourselves as who we truly are, really connect with that we are divine beings having this human experience. We are that beautiful, magnificent, universal, divine one expressing that we are all one because we're all individual, radiant beams of one light. And that we're all in process of awakening to this truth. So then, if that's our perspective of ourselves and others, we see others as fellow travelers on a journey of awakening. Everybody's in a different place, but everybody's on the journey of awakening. And when we see that, that helps us see the world as a friendly place, as for us, as supportive of the realization of our heart's desires. And we then begin to pay attention to the synchronicity, and we open to the opportunities that are there. And then that allows us to be filled with a sense of hope, of joyous anticipation, and of love. So I hope you'll take these ideas, get the book, read it if you haven't yet. They can be really transformational in your relationships, so that not only are you experiencing inner peace, but you're creating it in your world. All right, namaste.